Now, you probably think there has never been an American president anything like Donald Trump before.
I don't remember.
He is the only president elected without ever having served in public office or the military, although he's the first to have had a reality TV show.
You're fired. Go.
Donald Trump certainly ran a campaign that upended the political order and everything we thought we knew about how a candidate should behave.
And when you're a star, they like to do it. Grab them by the...
But Donald Trump likes to think of himself as being a lot like a previous president, America's 7th Commander-in-Chief, Andrew Jackson.
They keep talking about Trump and Jackson, Jackson and Trump.
By they keep talking about it, actually, he means he does.
Andrew Jackson rejected authority that looked down on the common people. Andrew Jackson was the people's president.
Trump says he identifies with Jackson because he took on an arrogant elite.
Oh, I know the feeling, Andrew.
And it's not just Trump. Some of his top supporters have encouraged the Jacksonian comparisons too.
He has the disruptive patterns of Andrew Jackson.
My first visit to our new president, the Oval Office, the other day, I looked up behind his desk and there was a sculpture of Andrew Jackson.
Now, I don't like to quibble, Mitch, but while that is a painting of Andrew Jackson in Trump's Oval Office, the bronze sculpture underneath isn't Jackson, it's a cowboy. Still, if the painting looks familiar, that's because Jackson is also the face on the American $20 bill, but maybe not for long. 2 years ago, the Obama administration announced Jackson, who was also a slave owner, would be replaced by anti-slavery campaigner Harriet Tubman. Candidate Donald Trump didn't like the sound of that.
Well, Andrew Jackson had a history of tremendous success for the country. I think Harriet Tubman is fantastic. I would love to leave Andrew Jackson and see if we can maybe come up with another denomination.
And he paid homage to Jackson on the 250th anniversary of his birth this year in Nashville, Tennessee. But who was Andrew Jackson, and was he really the Donald Trump of his day? Jackson was a military hero, leading American forces to a famous victory in 1815 against the British at the Battle of New Orleans. But the general they called Old Hickory was pretty rough around the edges. He was a lawyer, a governor and a senator before running for president in 1824. In a four-way race, Jackson finished more than 10 percentage points ahead of his nearest rival, John Quincy Adams, but lost a vote for president to Adams in the House of Representatives, in what Jackson called a corrupt bargain. Jackson ran again in 1828, embracing the media of the day, newspapers, to build a populist movement, more than doubling the number of voters, all white men in those days, of course, and sweeping into the White House, he then literally threw the doors open to his supporters who got drunk, stole stuff and ruined the rugs. As an outsider vowing to change Washington, there certainly seem to be echoes of Jackson in Trump, even though Jackson was a Democrat and Trump, of course, is a Republican. And according to one of America's leading Jackson experts, Professor Dan Feller, both sides of politics are now happy to encourage those Jackson-Trump comparisons, but for different reasons.
Historical analogy is facile and flimsy at best. President Trump has embraced Jackson, or rather a kind of half-correct image of Jackson as a model for himself. On the other hand, Democrats today, who generally outside of Nashville are not particularly proud of Andrew Jackson, many of them have been more than willing to give him to Trump. Basically, Trump has said Andrew Jackson was a great popular hero, and that's me, and many Democrats have said Andrew Jackson was a racist and a bigot and a xenophobe, and you can have him.
And Dan Feller says that Jackson certainly shook things up in Washington, using his power of veto to limit the power of Congress, making the presidency more dominant.
If you look at Jackson's program, it's a string of congressional vetoes. And that's rather unusual for a president who is often listed certainly among the most significant, if not among the greatest American presidents. You look at other prominent presidents and they have programs. Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, or else they were president during a major war and Jackson wasn't. Jackson, in fact, from the very beginning, had to battle a recalcitrant, sometimes opposition Congress, largely composed of people who had been elected on the basis of his own popularity.
And he says that plenty of Washington establishment types made the mistake of underestimating Andrew Jackson.
When he first appeared as a presidential possibility, they thought he's just a military man, he's a popular hero, but he doesn't have that much experience in government, he's obviously unfit. That turned out to be a serious miscalculation on their part, and by the time he was finally elected, everybody had disabused themselves of that notion. There were still those during his presidency, and some historians afterwards, who thought that he was simply a boob. He was in fact a better political operator than all of the people who had so summarily dismissed him too early.
But Dan Feller is not a fan of superficial historical comparisons, particularly when it comes to Andrew Jackson and Donald Trump.
Donald Trump and Andrew Jackson are both outsiders, but outsiders of a very different type. Andrew Jackson had spent almost his entire life in government service, whereas Donald Trump famously has never held government office before. While Jackson did attack elites in general, what he was really attacking, and this became the main focus of his administration, was he was attacking bankers and corporations. I have heard nothing of that nature from Donald Trump. In terms of foreign policy, there's this image of Jackson as a kind of militarist, chauvinist, xenophobic, hate all the foreigners type of guy. That doesn't match his presidential policy. As president, he was in fact something of an internationalist. He was in favor of reducing, not raising, trade barriers. He was in favor of extending international trade agreements. And he welcomed and tried in a modest way to nurture the growth of, as he put it, liberty and Republican government throughout the world.
All of the talk about Andrew Jackson has historians like Dan Feller concerned that his memory is being distorted. Instead of fake news, it's now fake history. And they say the media need to take their share of the blame.
There's a story that's been kicking around, it's been reported in a number of major news outlets, that Andrew Jackson fought 100 duels in his life. Well, the number's preposterous. He fought one duel, count them, one, maybe a second, though we're not sure about that. Jackson has been portrayed as inventing the Indian removal policy and scourging all the Indians. And in fact, the New York Times said he annihilated them all. Indian removal had been the policy of the United States government for long before Andrew Jackson became president. There's been a lot of fake history thrown around on both sides.
So without history as our guide, I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens to Donald Trump. But as for Andrew Jackson...
What happened to him, John?
Well,
what happened to him?
Near the end of his second term in office, a house painter named Richard Lawrence tried to kill him from point-blank range, but his pistols misfired. So Old Hickory beat him senseless with his walking stick.
Well, forget gun control. What about walking stick control?
Very dangerous in the day.